Scientists sequenced the bones of Rome's greatest enemy and discovered they weren't who history said they were. For 3,000 years, the story seemed settled. The Phoenicians, the legendary seafarers who gave the world its first alphabet, who ruled the ancient Mediterranean as master traders, and who founded the mighty city of Carthage that nearly brought Rome to its knees, were believed to be a single people, spreading their bloodline across the sea as they built colonies from Lebanon to Spain. But scientists have just sequenced the ancient DNA of these people, pulled from bones buried in their own cities, and what came back has quietly detonated that entire narrative. The Carthaginians, the people of Hannibal, Rome's most feared enemy, the supposed heirs of Phoenician civilization, were not, in fact, mostly descended from the Phoenicians at all. As the lead scientist put it after analyzing the genomes, the team found surprisingly little direct genetic contribution from the Levantine Phoenicians to the very people who carried their name. The identity was real, the civilization was real, but the bloodline history assumed was holding it all together simply wasn't there. Share this with everyone you know, because this discovery overturns one of the most basic assumptions we make about the ancient world. The idea that a culture spreads because a people spreads. That when you find Phoenician temples and Phoenician writing and Phoenician gods across the Mediterranean, you must be looking at the descendants of Phoenicians. The DNA proves that was wrong. It reveals an ancient world that was far more mixed, more mobile, and more modern than we ever imagined. A place where identity was something you could adopt, not just something you inherited. And it forces a haunting question. If the Carthaginians weren't genetically Phoenician, then who were they? Before we break down exactly what the DNA revealed, why it shatters the history books, and what it tells us about how civilizations truly spread, make sure you subscribe to Vault of Discovery. We're giving you the real science that rewrites the textbooks. First, you need to understand who the Phoenicians actually were. Around 3,100 years ago, a remarkable civilization emerged along the coast of the Levant, in what is now Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, in great trading cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. The Phoenicians were the supreme sea merchants of the ancient world. They gave humanity its first alphabet, the ancestor of the very letters you're reading right now, and they spread across the Mediterranean, establishing colonies and trading posts from one end of the sea to the other. Their greatest creation was Carthage, in modern Tunisia, which grew into a superpower so formidable that its wars with Rome, the Punic Wars, including Hannibal's legendary march across the Alps with war elephants, nearly ended the Roman Republic. The Western Phoenicians, centered on Carthage, became known to the Romans as the Punic people. Think about what scientists set out to do. They wanted to use ancient DNA to finally trace the genetic thread connecting the Phoenician homeland in the Levant to all those far-flung Punic colonies across the Mediterranean. So, an international team sequenced genome-wide data from 210 individuals, drawn from 14 Phoenician and Punic sites scattered across the Levant, North Africa, Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, and the island of Ibiza. The expectation was obvious and reasonable. These people shared the same language, the same religion, the same gods, the same culture. Surely they would share the same ancestry, carried west from Lebanon by Phoenician settlers. That assumption collapsed the moment the results came back. But here's the first shocking twist. When researchers looked for Levantine Phoenician DNA in the Punic populations of the central and western Mediterranean, they barely found any. The study's blunt conclusion was that the Levantine Phoenicians made little genetic contribution to Punic settlements between the 6th and 2nd centuries BCE, despite the overwhelming archaeological evidence of shared cultural, linguistic, and religious links. The people of Carthage, who built their entire identity on Phoenician civilization, who worshipped Phoenician gods and wrote in the Phoenician alphabet, were genetically almost unrelated to the Phoenicians of the homeland. It was as if the culture had traveled thousands of miles across the sea while leaving the bloodline behind. And then it got stranger, because if the Punic people weren't genetically Phoenician, the obvious question is, what were they? When scientists traced their actual ancestry, they found a genetic profile dominated not by the Levant, but by something else entirely. The Punic populations derived most of their ancestry from a profile similar to that of Sicily and the Aegean, genetically close to the people of modern Greece and Sicily. On top of that, a significant portion came from North Africa, a contribution that grew over time as the city of Carthage rose to dominate the region. In other words, the great Phoenician civilization of the West was, genetically, a Mediterranean melting pot, Greek, Sicilian, North African, wearing a Phoenician cultural identity. As one of the study's leaders described it, the genetic profile of the Punic world was extraordinarily heterogeneous. Then came the second devastating revelation, one that strikes at the very foundation of how we believe ancient civilizations spread. For generations, the model was simple. A culture expands because its people physically migrate outward, carrying their language and customs and bloodline into new lands, settling and replacing the locals. The Phoenician DNA shattered that model. The evidence showed that Phoenician culture spread not through large-scale mass migration, but through a dynamic process of cultural transmission and assimilation. The Phoenicians didn't conquer and replace. They connected. They built trading networks and colonies, and the local peoples of the Mediterranean, Greeks, Sicilians, North Africans, adopted their language, their religion, their way of life, and became Phoenician in everything but blood. As the researchers put it, people of entirely non-Levantine ancestry had adopted Levantine Phoenician culture, including its language and religion. Identity in the ancient Mediterranean was something you could put on. But the third twist changes everything about how connected this ancient world really was. Buried in the genetic data was a single, astonishing detail. Among all these hundreds of individuals scattered across the sea, researchers identified a pair of close relatives, likely second cousins, buried in two completely different places, one at a Punic site in North Africa and the other across the water in Sicily. Think about what that means. Two members of the same family, separated by hundreds of miles of open Mediterranean, living and dying on different shores. This was not a world of isolated, rooted populations. This was a world in constant motion. People, ships, families, and lineages flowing back and forth across the sea in a way we associate with the modern age, not the ancient one. The Mediterranean wasn't a barrier between peoples. It was a highway. So why did the original Phoenician bloodline almost vanish from the record? The researchers have a compelling theory. The Punic colonies became so successful and prosperous that they drew in waves of local migrants from the surrounding Mediterranean, while at the same time the Phoenician city-states back in the Levant declined and lost their independence, choking off the flow of people from the homeland. Over generations, the original Levantine ancestry was, in the words of one researcher, effectively flushed out, diluted down to traces too faint to detect, swallowed by the cosmopolitan tide of the Mediterranean world. And this is where the discovery becomes genuinely profound, because it tells us that the ancient idea of a people was never really about DNA at all. The Carthaginians were Phoenician because they chose to be, because they spoke the language, worshipped the gods, and lived the culture, regardless of where their grandparents were born. The thing that made a civilization was never the bloodline. It was the shared identity. The Mediterranean, as one description beautifully put it, was civilization in motion, an endless tide of people, languages, and lineages, mixing and re-emerging. One thing is absolutely certain. This single study has rewritten the story of the Phoenicians more dramatically than any discovery in over a century. It revealed that the Punic people had almost no Levantine Phoenician ancestors. It revealed that their true ancestry was a Mediterranean mosaic of Aegean, Sicilian, and North African roots. And it revealed the most important truth of all, that Phoenician civilization conquered the ancient world not by replacing its peoples, but by winning their hearts and minds, spreading through culture rather than blood. The mighty enemy of Rome was not a transplanted tribe from Lebanon. It was the Mediterranean itself, given a Phoenician name. And the researchers believe this is only the beginning. Thousands more ancient genomes are waiting in the bones beneath old cities across the sea, each one capable of rewriting another chapter we thought was closed. As DNA technology grows sharper and reaches deeper into the past, the secret of the Phoenicians may prove to be just the first of many ancient identities that turn out to be nothing like the history books told us. When the next set of bones gives up its code, the story of who the ancient peoples really were may have to be rewritten all over again. Stay tuned.